Now, the problem is that the policymakers that write those documents are themselves implicated in acts of corruption, meaning that if they were supportive of those policies, they would actually find themselves facing jail time of about 10 to 15 years, very serious crimes.
What is the state of the global economy, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, in this clip from an exclusive client webinar, my colleagues Bheki Mahlobo and Frans Cronje discuss the forces that will shape the global economy in the months and years ahead. They also explore how South Africa might respond to these trends. If you enjoyed this analysis, please do give this video a like and subscribe to the channel.
While you think, I might put one to Bheki. And Bheki, that's the global and our dollar fear and Jerome Powell and his inflation prognosis, and what we think is going to happen there. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's actually quite interesting what's happening in the US currently. I see that there's the theory taking traction currently is that of modern monetary theory. This is the belief that essentially governments around the world cannot go bankrupt if they issue currency in the own denominated national currency. Let's say, for example, if debt in South Africa is issued in rand terms, then they can never go broke because they can simply print more of the rand. This is taking traction all over the world, even here in South Africa amongst the National Treasury. Certain officials are in favor of that economic theory, which will result in massive inflation, unfortunately, in future. Now, the reason why we think that's happening in much of the developed world is that mainly due to the inequalities that Frans showed you there of household wealth compared to nominal GDP. We're seeing that this is causing a lot of tension in terms of cultural wars in the developed world. And that's why these policies are taking more and more traction on the daily basis today. So that's the major threat that we see in the Western world. There has been talks in South Africa, but not to the same extent as what we see in the US as well as in the European Union.
Yeah, so we haven't bought the currency recovery as strongly as some other analysts have domestically here, and we haven't bought the trade balance, which is so good now, as strongly as other analysts have, because we have this doubt about how sustainable the post-COVID global recovery is, and that none of the sort of positive markers on South Africa really reveal domestic factors. They are a fortuitous set of external circumstances financed by the printing of money by central banks in the West. So we have we have a worry now on the rand, Bheki. But fire questions at us as they come on the currency, the view.
The currency on the view, there's quite a few factors that we have flagged throughout the course of this, starting through last year, November, until currently. There's a lot of factors. The first one, which France raised, was largely the stimulus measures around the world, which has led to an increase in commodity prices on a global scale. South Africa's exports predominantly, although to a less extent in recent years, is made up of commodities. So whenever there are periods of high commodity prices, we see the rand strengthening, mainly due to our exports. That has led to a trade surplus currently. We have a vast trade surplus. This is something that I haven't seen before, largely because of the increase in commodity prices. Some of these commodity prices have increased by 80%. If you look at such things as copper, they're now sitting at $10,000 per ton there. That's extraordinary amounts of increases in commodities. So that's a factor towards the rand. Another factor towards the rand is the increase in government yields in South Africa compared to developed markets. South African bond yields are a lot higher compared to developed countries such as the United States, as well as Germany, where the yields are actually at negative. Now, this has led and incentivized foreign investors to buy government bonds, as well as financial institutions in South Africa to buy South African bonds. There is a risk to that. In fact, the South African Reserve Bank has flagged that this may cause systemic financial risk in South African pension funds as well as commercial banks in the country if the government were to default on those bonds. So that's the risk that South Africa faces in terms of that.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
Now, the third question we get is a very good question. It's why is the ANC aware that it is in trouble? And the answer is absolutely yes. I assure you, there's absolutely no doubt at all, none, zero. Its own analysis of this position is very good. Why would you not reform? It seems so obvious that you should reform. Why would you not reform if you know you should and you understand the consequences? Yeah.
There are two parts to this, Frans. The first one is the estimations that the number of NEC officials that are implicated in acts of corruption that you showed in the briefing. I think fundamentally why NC officials are opposed to reforms is because the necessary reforms that will enable South Africa to grow at levels comparable to emerging markets would be that of prosecution, labor reforms, and the like. Now, the problem is that the policymakers that write those documents are themselves implicated in acts of corruption, meaning that if they were supportive of those policies, they would actually find themselves facing jail time for about 10 to 15 years. Very serious crimes, as what Frans emphasized in his briefings. Another point to it is that I think the reason why the ANC is largely against reforms is that this is a trend that is constantly worrying us, is that it sees that it may be able to sustain its current levels with low economic performance as well as high unemployment levels. South Africa currently in absolute terms has historically high unemployment levels of about 11.4 million people, just absolute terms under the expanded definitions, which includes people that have discouraged, have given up the aspiration of seeking employment, which is a risk that we're seeing here, is that a lot of South Africans are giving up the aspirations for employment in the country, mainly due to the fact that employment opportunities have been on the decline since 2007. And with a youth unemployment rate of 75%. So I think that's one of the factors that has led to the ANC being less reluctant on.
It's a really important point that most analysts miss, is that the ANC is losing power amongst people with rising living standards, and it's gaining support amongst people with declining living standards. That's very dangerous.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, you might want to sign up for our 30-day free trial. There's a link in the description below where you can access all of our reports and client webinars. Until next time, take care.